Material Design, Android's native design language, originally debuted in 2014. Up until that point, the design practices for apps on Android were wildly inconsistent. In an attempt to make app design more cohesive, Material Design was built around the idea of physical materials and how such objects would interact with each other. The toolbar and floating action button, or FAB, became iconic components of Material Design, but over time, developers stopped putting in much effort into adhering to the guidelines, both because the tools for implementing them were scarce and the fact that the guidelines were a bit vague. Many developers simply ended up turning their apps into very generic implementations of the guidelines. 4 years later, Google announced the next phase, material theming. The idea here is for developers to take the existing design language and customize it to fit their brand, selecting very distinct colors, using a unique font, buttons, etc. The designs that Google demoed have a very different look than the original material design, taking a decided departure from generic. Setting an example for other developers, Google's own apps have, of course, begun to receive updates to transform them with material theming. In this video, we'll take a look at some of the latest new looks for Google's apps. An important clarification, however, is the fact that material theming is not Google's own material theme. After seeing the latest app design updates from Google, you might assume that to be properly material themed is to use plenty of white space, the product sans font, and a fab, sometimes with a colorful plus glyph. That is not the case. What I just described is Google's own custom material theme that reflects Google's branding. Developers and brands, even Google, are encouraged to create their own take on material theming. With that out of the way, let's take a look at Google's latest design changes for their apps. First up, let's take a look at the Google Play Games app. This was one of the very first apps to receive a makeover. In fact, the design began to change even before material theming was announced, and this tipped off the design community that some new design guidelines were in the works. As you might guess, the new Play Games has plenty of white space, but it also implements something a bit interesting: colored shadows. Up until now, material design shadows have always been a shade of gray, but Play Games bucks that tradition, opting for green, blue, even multicolored shadows. The font has changed as well to Google's own product sans. Next, Google Messages recently received its makeover. The toolbar has disappeared, and the title of the app has been centered. An ocean of white now takes up the majority of the screen, and a fab at the bottom right corner sits ready for the user to start a new conversation. An interesting fact is that this style fab showed up in the now deceased Allo app, which just goes to show that material theming concepts have been in the works for quite a while. In a similar fashion, Google Phone has received this rather white makeover, with a search bar up top and bottom tabs for navigation. Product Sans is also present here. Google Tasks, originally a web-only service, received a complete product relaunch in April, just before the Google I/O event. While it was a bit limited, it gave us a very clear look at what was to be Google's own material theme, although we assumed it would simply be called Material Design 2.0. It featured a centered fab and bottom toolbar, with the overflow drawer, with rounded corners, sliding up from the bottom. The font is, yet again, Product Sans. Finally, we have Google News, which took the existing Play newsstand and redesigned it from the ground up. While one of the major changes is the introduction of material theming, it also now has new features such as full coverage, allowing users to see reporting from various outlets around a specific issue. It now feels like a much more viable option for getting the news. With regards to the design, it again has lots of white space, a centered app title at the top of the screen, as well as a slight change to how tabs look. Of course, there are still many apps that haven't received a material theming facelift from Google yet. Most notably is the Play Store. While it has gotten a few different design tweaks, specifically around the app listing page, the overall look of the app is still decidedly OG material design, although some would argue that it breaks many rules in the material design guidelines. It's quite odd that Google didn't redesign all of its apps at the announcement of material theming, but I guess we'll just have to wait. So, what do you guys think of material theming, and more specifically, Google's own custom theme? My name is Jackson Hayes, and this is Android Police.